I am very happy that you could join us. My name is Marcela Morales. I work in Grupo Faro. I will be filling up for my colleague Juan Jose, who was supposed to join us, but unfortunately he can't. Well, before starting our presentation, first I want to give you some general guidelines on how to use the platform. As you can see, there is a general chat. Down on your right hand. You can interact with the other participants there. And additionally, you have a questions chat where you can pose your questions. Let me just remind you that you will be able to pose your questions to the presenters or to me directly in that chat, and we will address all the questions at the end of the presentation. Also, on your left hand, on the bar on your left, you will find a questions. There's a bar where you can ask questions. If you have any technical difficulty, you can ask any specific questions right there. And also, let me check if there's anything else. Okay, if you have any particular question you want to ask me or the presenter, please just let us know through the chat. Yes, there is also the possibility for you to listen to this webinar either in English or in Spanish. To access the language channel, you just have to click on the interpreter's link on your left, and then you can choose the language as well. Before starting the presentation, as you know, today we're going to talk more about the role that enterprise centers have when adopting and developing local content in African countries. For that purpose, my colleague Elijah Mushmesa from ACOD will be making a short presentation giving you the main guidelines on this topic, and will be sharing with you his views. I will now give the floor to Elijah. He will be introducing himself, telling you a little bit about his experience, and yes, so welcome everyone again. I'm so happy you could join us, and yes, so I'll just give the floor to Elijah right now.
In our this year's Learning Alliance and our program of ERA. My name is Elijah Dickens Mshemeza. I'm a senior research fellow at ACOD, Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment. My background is in political science and development studies, and I've been carrying out research in various fields, including extractives and the African continent. Our topic, as you have heard from Marcela, is getting more from oil and gas sector, lessons from Africa and Latin America. But for our detailed analysis, I'm picking lessons from specific countries in Africa that have had more experiences on the issues of enterprise centers. That is Angola, Chad, and Nigeria. And after the presentation, as you have heard from the moderator, we'll have questions, a Q&A, and myself and my other colleagues at ACOD, John, and from Group FAR, those who have been working with us, will be able to answer your questions. By way of introduction, I want to focus on how these enterprise centers have been able to work under the framework of international organizations and institutions. When you look at the African continent, we have had experiences with international organizations, the UN agencies, that have been working in Africa to do a number of things. We see that, for example, in the oil and gas sector, international organizations, particularly international finance institutions like the World Bank, the International Finance Commission, which is also a member of the World Bank Group, international non-government organizations, the UN agencies like UNDP, UNICEF, Food Agriculture Organization, and international oil companies. All these are known to have supported processes that assess the gaps in the private sector development. They have been involved in assessing gaps in exploration and production of petroleum and gas products. And they have also been involved in designing and implementing local content policies and legislations in countries like Angola, Nigeria, Chad, and Ghana. Now, when you look at Latin America, the available evidence is that international finance institutions have not played an important role in promoting and designing local content policies. But recently, we see experiences from countries like Brazil. The World Bank currently is involved in supporting local content policy design in Peru, in Mexico, and it is believed that there are society pressures. People really want to see the oil and gas industry being useful and helpful to the common people. So we see demands to have policies being made that are pro-people. And it is thought that these demands, society's demands, the pressures, could have attracted international finance institutions like the World Bank, like Inter-American Development Bank, to come and support countries like Brazil and Chile. So it is too early to draw lessons from Latin America, but given that these international financial institutions have started to work with these countries where local content policies are being implemented, we think in the near future we are going to see more lessons that are related to some of the cases we are going to analyze. But what is an enterprise center? From my own point of view, I think an enterprise center is an institution that is put in place by various stakeholders to enhance the capacity of local private entities to effectively participate in the oil and gas industry and the wider economy. There are other enterprise centers that, of course, operate outside the oil and gas sector. But for this particular sector, the oil and gas, the enterprise centers that have been put in place, they are taking a private perspective. In other words, these enterprise centers are not public enterprise; they are private entities, and we need to know why. Why have these enterprise centers been put in place in these countries that are implementing local content policies? Of course, there are quite a number of reasons that are responsible for this. The desire to implement local content policies, to have institutions in place that are very, very, very critical for implementation, because you can have good policies, you can even have good legislations, but if you don't have a strategy and if you don't have institutions that have been designed to implement, then you have these policies really not working. I want to continue exploring the reasons really that have been what you may call the rationale for putting these enterprise centers in place, because a number of countries have put local content policies in place. They have focused on various strategies. for purposes of creating employment, for example. But these policies can achieve reasonable outputs if there is capacity in the local private sector. But if the capacity in the local private sector is inadequate, you are unlikely to see the participation of the local companies in terms of supply of goods and services to the industry. So this kind of desire to see the participation of local companies, participation of small and medium enterprises, the experiences in some of the countries we are going to examine show that enterprise centers are put in place to facilitate the development of competitive, capable, and sustainable local skills and supply industries. So enterprise centers are desirable to support small and medium enterprises to competitively position them and take advantage of numerous business opportunities in the oil and gas sector. In summary, enterprise centers have been found as appropriate institutions for implementing local content policies to achieve local participation, skills development, technology transfer, jobs creation in the oil and gas industry. From now having looked at the rationale or why enterprise centers were put in place, I want to focus on some cases that we think provide best case scenarios, and these cases are found in Africa. And I want to begin with Angola. Angola is one of the African countries with large depots of oil and gas. It is one of the countries that adopted local content policies where there was a need to create employment opportunities, to have more skills for the workforce, and to improve the capacity and competitiveness of local companies that could serve as contractors and suppliers to the industry. And Angola is one of the countries that has what we may call specific local content framework. In other words, the legislations, the contracts that have been put in place, you'd find very clear entrenched provisions on local content. So it is one of the countries with a highly developed local content framework. So this country, around the year 2003, carried out a gap analysis of its small and medium enterprises and to analyze and see the gaps that existed so that we could allow the private sector to play its role in the development of the oil and gas industry. I've already noted that international organizations and international institutions, together with international oil companies, participated in this gap analysis. And among the things that were examined was to see how enterprise development centers could be expanded and how they could access finance for business expansion. One of the challenges that faces local content implementation in both Africa and Latin America is the issue of credit, the issue of finances for the local companies to participate in the industry. So Angola, with its development partners, wanted to see what type of gaps that existed and what challenges that existed to allow the implementation of local content to be done successfully. It was from that gap analysis and studies, it was argued that the success of local business required the active participation and partnership between the international oil companies and the enterprise development center, and then participating small and medium enterprises with the Angolan government being an overarching, giving an approval, what we call the government's overarching approval, the government's strong commitment to support the development of the Enterprise Center. So in 2004, under the Public-Private Partnership Initiative, the United Nations Development Program and one international oil company called Chevron launched the Angola Enterprise Program with the purpose to promote enterprise development by supporting the process, and they did that by building consensus around a common vision and a national strategy for enterprise development. So you can see from Angola, we see partnership, and we see the coming in of various stakeholders, UN agencies, international oil companies, the government being represented by the national oil company called Sanunga, the civil society organizations, all coming together to have a shared vision of having a viable institution and framework to implement local content policies. So this is a very interesting scenario, and we're going to see the same thing happened in other countries. And it was very important because when you have various stakeholders developing some consensus or having a common vision, then you know the implementation of the policy becomes a little bit easier compared to when there are disagreements here and there. So Angola presents us a situation where you have a common understanding of the need to have an institution that implements local content policies. The analysis from these organizations, it was very clear that the establishment of a viable institution is a way to go. And because of this, in 2005, representatives from the Angolan state-run company called Sanunga and the international oil company represented by British Petroleum, and then Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Total, after the gaps analysis and the consensus that you needed an institution to help in the implementation of local content, an enterprise center, CARE, was put in place to serve as the recommended enterprise development center. Now, the oil companies provided the capital and market demand, while an international civil society organization called CDC, Development Solutions, it was contracted to run this enterprise center. So this CARE, the enterprise center, which was put in place, now became a very focal institution for now to give various advice and training various small and medium enterprises that now we are ready to participate in the implementation of local content policies. Angola, again, is a very interesting case because this is where we also find a very strong national oil company because the national oil company in Angola is a very, very, very important institution that supported the establishment of the enterprise center. But we could say, in terms of really what became as a consensus of why this enterprise center was put in place was that it was envisaged that to support local small and medium enterprises and building linkages between the oil industry, consortium, and local suppliers. So with the establishment of this enterprise center in Angola and the enterprise center beginning to provide services to the small and medium enterprises, there are results that have been registered. For example, the program under the enterprise center for building enterprises has strengthened the country's supply chain network and improved the ability of the Angolan enterprises to provide materials to international oil companies. This has been observed. Again, some of the small and medium enterprises trained by the center, that is CARE, have gone on to become large-scale operations, thriving as a result of the oil industry needs. There is an example of an SME called NASA. This NASA is a commercial import and export company, and it has been able to provide personal protective equipment for some years. And this is a company that had personnel of 2 people, but has been able to grow from a 2-person outfit to a staff of 20. In developing countries like Angola, that is a very great achievement. If you have a family business, yes, registered as a limited company with 2 people, but if it is able to expand and employ 20 people and is able to supply to the oil and gas industry, you see, this is a very important achievement. And this was a result of the activities and the support of the Enterprise Center in Angola. So there are more achievements we can talk of. For example, again, supported by Chevron, NASA was one of the first clients at the Enterprise Center, receiving training in financial management, human resource management, bidding, and contracting. And areas of bidding, these are very technical areas. Unless a company gets some training in some of these countries like Angola, it will not be easy really to win. But through the services of the Enterprise Center, we see again NASA being able to gain expertise in bidding. Again, the project under Enterprise Center generated 4,809 jobs. And in Africa, for a program to generate jobs in thousands is a very great achievement because unemployment is very high. We also see in Angola over 100 companies certified in various sectors as a result of the activities of the Enterprise Center. Over 200 business training delivered to more than over 3,000 participants, representing over 2,000 Angolan companies. All this was the work of the Enterprise Center. So you can see there have been really impressive achievements by the work of the Enterprise Centers in Angola because of this work. Because as you may be aware, participants, from the discussions we have been having, the issue of skills is very, very, very critical. It's very critical. There are more results we can point out in terms of statistics because of the work of the Enterprise Center. Again, participants, small medium enterprises, were able to win around 348 contracts worth United States dollar 241 million. We also see a database established because of the activities of the Enterprise Center with over 1,000 small medium enterprises registered. Because for international companies also to deal with companies, you need a database that provides information on what these companies are doing, their capacities, their experience, the technical know-how they have. So establishing a database was very, very important, and it has been growing. And because of the activities of these small medium enterprises and allowing to operate within the private sector paradigm, the Enterprise Center became an organ of the Chamber of Commerce of Angola. Participants would know that worldwide, the Chamber of Commerce is a very strong, recognized entity in terms of business. So for an enterprise center to become a member of the Chamber of Commerce of a country and then becoming a member of the worldwide network of Chamber of Commerce is a very great achievement. Now, as I wind up on this Angola, we need to draw lesson. What lesson can we pick from the Enterprise Center in Angola? Both countries of Africa and Latin America, is there something we can learn from Angola? And I'm saying yes. The experience of the Enterprise Center in Angola has provided a way to catalyze oil companies' local procurement efforts into a common platform, providing uniformity of approach and making the initiative relevant. The Enterprise Center CARE facilitated the exchange of information and ideas between buyers and suppliers on ways to streamline supply chains. So other countries in Africa and Latin America that would find this experience interesting would see that indeed with enterprise centers, the issue of being a one-stop center for information and ideas is a very interesting scenario to learn from. But let me look at other cases in Africa that may also bring rich experiences on how enterprise centers have been able to implement local content policies or even to implement the local content agenda. Chad is a very interesting case because we do not find specific local content policies and legislations. Although they have some contracts, they have made contracts where there are some provisions to implement local content agenda. So Chad is an interesting case, is that in spite of lack or absence of a specific local content policy and legislation, because what exists is still in general terms. Those of you who have been active on the Learning Alliance, we discussed this issue. So Chad was able to implement a local content agenda in terms of improving skills of local companies without a specific policy. Now, at the time of discovery and exploitation, if you look at the Chad's economy, it was highly informal with few existing companies that would meet contractual requirements set by international oil companies. Chad's economy was dominated by micro, small, and medium enterprises and lacked basic technical, public, and financial infrastructure necessary to fully reap the benefits of the development of the oil fields in the country. So because of this, and in the absence of specific policies and legislations, the Chad Enterprise Center was established as a vehicle for delivering micro, small, and medium enterprises capacity building activities and value-added benefits linked to the Chad-Cameroon pipeline project. As you might be aware, the Chad collaborated in partnership with Cameroon and put up a pipeline project which was supported by the World Bank in terms of financing. And the Enterprise Center here is an institution that we see has been able to implement an agenda, local content agenda, even in the absence of policies. In some of the publications we have made, both as Accord and the Group Faro, we have found the Chad case very interesting, that in the absence of policies and legislation, something that can be done. But this does not mean that a country like Chad should not move to have local content policies with entrenched provisions in the policy, in the legislations and contracts. But we see it as an interesting case where some reasonable outputs have been achieved in terms of skills development, in terms of creating employment, and in terms of involving local companies. And we attribute partly this kind of positive outputs because of the existence of the Enterprise Center. So in terms of rationale, in Chad, it was envisaged that to support local small and medium enterprises and build linkages between the oil industry consortium and local suppliers, the Enterprise Center was perceived to be a one-stop shop for a spectrum of services such as local supplier identification and evaluation, consultations on contract management and delivery, information dissemination, and access to finance. So these were found to be very important functions that were very critical for building the capacity of local companies, particularly the small and medium enterprises. So you can see how Chad is a very interesting to study. I know right now Chad is engaged in a process to improve its local content framework. We believe they will have a detailed policy and legislation that will entrench local content provisions. And with the existence of the Enterprise Center right now, the policies at least will, as they draw these policies, as they work out these policies, there is something to learn from of what they have been doing and which even other countries can learn from. There are also a number of achievements we can talk of in Chad that have been able, that have been registered because of the activities of the Enterprise Center in terms of the skills developed, in terms of the jobs that have been created, and in terms of some of the participation of the local companies. The achievements registered in Chad are quite a number of them, and we see companies being trained in terms of areas of procurement, in terms of how they can access capital, in terms of how they can compete for contracts, and a number of companies in Chad have been able to win contracts with international oil companies. So again, like Angola, Chad is one of the countries that have been able to use enterprise centers to achieve reasonable outputs in terms of skills development and in terms of jobs created, and also participation of local companies. The other country that has also brought in enterprise centers is Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the countries that has a developed local content framework. It has a very strong legislation, the Nigeria Local Content Development Act, which was passed in 2010, with very entrenched provisions on local content. So Nigeria also has established an enterprise center to support the development of small, medium enterprises and local companies. And we see also a number of them, companies developing the capacity that has enabled these companies to work and be able to win contracts. You see from my presentation that a number of Nigerian local companies are now in a position to win contracts because of the training they have received from the enterprise centers. So from these two case studies, the Nigeria experience, the Chadian experience, the Angolan experience, there are some conclusions we can make. There are some conclusions we can make about enterprise centers and how strong these enterprise centers have been able to support the implementation of local content policies. Now, I want to conclude this presentation so that we can have more time for discussion. From a broader perspective, enterprise centers have enabled citizens and local companies to participate in building linkages between the oil and gas industry and the wider economy, especially in Africa. Now, these initiatives undertaken by the enterprise centers, which we have analyzed, that is Nigeria, Chad, and Angola. Of course, there are other countries like Ghana that have also started enterprise centers, but they have not done much, so there is still yet time to examine their experience. These initiatives have been able to involve communication and training of local suppliers on relevant standards. This is one area where we think enterprise centers have done very well. Communication and training of local suppliers on relevant standards. Training of local suppliers on overall business skills and preparation of bids. The other area is business incubation, promotion of collaboration between small and medium enterprises. They have also been able to introduce an e-procurement system and training of local suppliers to use it. They have also been able to provide assistance with access to finance and identification of joint venture partners. These are areas we think the enterprise centers have done very well. So countries in Africa and Latin America, because of these achievements we have highlighted, we think countries in Africa and Latin America can gain from these experiences, because we think the enterprise centers provide an important aspect of industry collaboration that promotes participation in sustainable development of small and medium enterprises in these countries. Particularly countries of Latin America that have not established enterprise centers and are also in the process of adopting local content policies, or have been implementing local content policies like Brazil, like Mexico, like Colombia. They could also explore from these experiences from Africa and see how they can further the implementation of local content policies. So we think this is a very interesting development and a good experience to learn from Africa. As a way forward, I'm arguing that adopting local content as a strategy to reap long-term benefits from a non-renewable natural resource is gaining more ground in Africa and Latin American economies. So based on what has been achieved through enterprise centers, in our cases, we analyzed Angola, Nigeria, and Chad, countries still developing their local content frameworks should consider the role of institutional building through programs of national oil companies and other partnerships as critical for achieving meaningful local content outcomes. And for Latin American countries, which are still improving their local content policies, and those which are engaging international finance institutions like the World Bank, should also learn from African experience of engaging enterprise centers to implement their local content policies. And among the good practices, which I would like to put on record, include training programs through enterprise centers should be developed, targeting skills development in the local economy and promoting the long-term reputation of local companies as good corporate citizens. So, in a nutshell, the experiences we have seen from countries in Africa demonstrate that you can have local content policies, you can have good legislations, but if you don't have a strategy and institutions that implement these good policies and legislations, then you will not have the desirable outputs. So the enterprise centers that have been developed in Africa on the private model perspective are very good examples of institutions that implement local content policies. This does not mean that these countries have arrived, that they are success stories and that everything is perfect in terms of implementation. But the enterprise centers provide good practices that are inspirational to other countries that are still implementing their local content policies or are in the process of developing their frameworks that will enable the implementation of local content policies. I will thank you for listening to me, and I'm ready to take your questions so that we can continue with this conversation in the next hour we have at our disposal.
For this presentation. Right now our participants have the chance to pose any questions if you have any. But before addressing these questions, I just wanted to highlight some of the important points that Elijah made through this presentation. I think enterprise centers are a very interesting space for enhancing private participation, especially in Latin America, where we don't really have such spaces and where the participation of private companies tends to be challenging, especially in the oil and gas sector. So from Elijah's presentation, collaboration seems to be a key aspect when talking about the Enterprise Center. How small and medium enterprises interact among each other to create the conditions to engage in the value chain. So I think what important lessons from Latin America in that respect come around the matter of collaboration. How can we really create the conditions for private companies to work among each other, to develop the capacities to I'm so sorry, I think I'm talking too slow. I'm just going to make us a pause for our interpreter to be able to translate what I'm saying. And well, in the meantime, I just wanted to invite our participants to pose any questions. You can use the chat to do it. You can direct your questions directly to Elijah, and I will be reading those questions as soon as they appear. You can use either the general chat if you prefer, or the questions chat. Additionally, in the meantime, until our participants pose their questions, I had some questions for Elijah in the meantime. Elijah, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the case of Uganda. While you are designing your local content policy at the moment, is the Ugandan government considering creating or has already created enterprise centers in your country?
Was done by a consortium of international oil companies, the government of Uganda, and the private sector. And one of the recommendations from this gaps assessment was that an enterprise center be established. It is called Industry Enhancement Center. That's what it will be called. It has not been put in place, but there is consensus. There is consensus by the stakeholders that this institution should be put in place. And I think among the international oil companies, Total is taking the lead on behalf of the international oil companies, and on behalf of the government, the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources is the government department that is taking the lead. And then civil society organizations. We have a coalition of civil society organizations on oil and gas, and that platform is being hosted by Accord. We are also active in terms of supporting the process. We have had offline events where we have discussed these issues with various stakeholders. And we think very soon this enterprise center will be put in place, which will supplement the activities that are going on in the country. Because the government put in place an institution to impart skills among the youth. And this institution is also collaborating with universities in terms of skills development. But what we want to help the Ugandan government, as a think tank, is to come up with a strategy. We think Uganda is moving in all directions. It has not come up with a very clear strategy, like whether to say we are going to use national industrial participation as a leading strategy for implementation of local content. And part of the reason is because the policy, the local content policy is not yet in place. The draft is still at the level of cabinet. It is not in the public domain. But we think when this policy has been finalized, the issues of strategy will be clear. And we'll also, from our part as a think tank, will be pushing to have a specific legislation, because the existing legislations are general. There are few provisions on local content, but we need something like the Nigerian Local Content Development Act, something like that. So we think with local content policy in place, with a specific legislation, and now that there is consensus to have enterprise center in place, we think that will be very positive in terms of implementation. Should the enhancement center, the enterprise center, be put in place before these other registrations, then we may draw from experiences of Chad, that you can have some good practices being implemented by the enterprise center, even when you don't have specific registrations and policies.
Right now, I have a couple of questions for our participants. First, our colleague Patricia Caballero. She's asking, in many countries in Latin America, there are already chambers of commerce that are very active and have a role, including private companies along productive activities. She is asking whether enterprise centers would duplicate the efforts that chambers of commerce already made. So that would be the first question. I'm going to read a couple of more so you can address them all. Then Musambia Mutambala, he's asking if the enterprise development centers are private, as seen with Angola and other countries. What do you think about the sustainability of the initiative? The private sector is broad. Who specifically owns the center? So I'm just going to give you the floor so you can address those two questions, and then I'm going to move on to the next two.
Now, if in Latin America, the Chamber of Commerce are providing services like I've outlined, done by the enterprise centers, then there is no need to establish enterprise centers. The issue is content. We have to distinguish issues of content and form. If the Chamber of Commerce are providing training and skills, they are providing information on procurement, then there will be no need to establish enterprise centers and call them enterprise centers. Like you have heard, both in Angola and Chad, once these enterprise centers became well functional, they were now put under the Chamber of Commerce. So they are a member of the Chamber of Commerce. You may not establish, and if those functions are not being done in Latin America, which I doubt, then you may have to you may not call them enterprise centers, but then you'd have to encourage those activities to be done under the Chamber of Commerce. So it would be a duplication in case those functions are already being implemented by the private sector under the Chamber of Commerce. But what is important is to have the training, equipping skills, and giving opportunities and empowering the local companies to participate in the oil and gas. That is really the bottom line. Whether the institutions are called enterprise centers, whether they are called private entities, whether they are called branches of Chamber of Commerce. Okay. I was saying that if the Chamber of Commerce in Latin America are already carrying out activities that are being carried out by enterprise centers in Africa, then that would be a duplication. But the important thing is, are there programs for local companies in Latin America that train in areas of procurement, of contracting, of skills, technology transfer? If that is being done, then there is no need to duplicate institutions and establish enterprise centers. Because what the people of Latin America and Africa want is to see that the oil and gas industry benefits them. How does it benefit them? The local companies are engaged in the oil and gas supply chain. They can provide goods and services to the industry. They can acquire skills to work in the industry, that even when the industry of oil is over, these skills can be applied in the rest of the economy. Really, that's the bottom line. The second question was the sustainability. Who own these enterprise centers? They are private entities. Once the consortium has put these enterprise centers in place, like in the case of both Chad, Angola, and Nigeria, Chad and Angola, the enterprise centers are now members of the Chamber of Commerce. So they work as private entities, but with a clear vision. In the case of Nigeria, the enterprise center is hosted by a university. But it operates to serve the interests of society without being directed by, say, a government or a university, but the university houses the enterprise center, and it operates on the principles of private paradigm. So once an institution is operating on the principles of private paradigm, then it is sustained by the way it responds to the forces of demand and supply. If the enterprise center is providing what the local companies want, if it can supply good knowledge, definitely there will be demand from the clients. And those clients, the more they benefit from the industry, the more they encourage others to go to this enterprise center to gain more skills. So like in the market, the forces of demand and supply will sustain the operations of the enterprise centers.
Elijah, for that answer. I'm going to keep reading two more. Julian Berungi asked, thanks, Professor Elijah. In the examples of Angola, Chad, and Nigeria, who initiated the enterprise centers? Was it spelled out in the local content policies, or was it driven more by the local private sector of the oil companies? And another question posed by Amir. He is asking, he's wondering what would be an effective alternative to enterprise centers to organize public-private partnerships and small-medium enterprise participation in the supply chains.
The enterprise center in Angola. In Angola, as I said, there was a consortium of various stakeholders that came together to do a needs assessment of how local content policies would be implemented. Angola, like any other African country, has had experience of working with international organizations. So already the UNDP was working in Angola. The international companies were in place. The need to have local companies participate in the economy was apparent, but the government, through its arm, Sanangor, the national oil company, taking the lead and working with the other partners, decided to carry out a needs assessment. The international oil companies provided funds. UNDP had also started promoting private enterprises in its own way, as it has always done. Now, when the needs assessments were made, one of the recommendations was that an enterprise center should be established. So one could say the demands of implementing local content policies inevitably led to the birth of the enterprise centers, the enterprise center in Angola. I wouldn't say this was the the International Oil Company. But I could say the National Oil Company took the lead, because if a government does not provide a neighboring environment, then you cannot have International Oil Company or an international organization like a UN agency, UNDP, having freedom to carry out a needs assessment. So here we see the role of the National Oil Company in implementation of local content, because on behalf of the Angolan government, the National Oil Company was able to work with all these stakeholders as a consortium to find out what was needed. And one of the recommendations was to have an enterprise center. That's for Julian. And the same thing with the Chad. The same thing with Chad. The Ministry of Energy, together with the International Finance Commission, on behalf of the World Bank, which was already operating there, civil society organizations that were involved in Chad, they all came together to support the establishment of the Enterprise Center. And eventually, of course, the center went to the Chamber of Commerce. And again, if the Chadian government was not willing, and if it had not provided an enabling environment, then an Enterprise Center would not have been put in place. Because the Chadian government put an enabling environment, was able to sign various agreements with the World Bank, accepting even other good practices on environmental management. So the government was able to provide an environment that gave birth to the Enterprise Center. What are the alternatives to the Enterprise Centers? I think implementation of local content cannot be done by one institution. We see in Africa, for example, if you look at Nigeria, there is what we call the Nigeria Control Monitoring Boards. There are monitoring boards which deal with issues of measurement of local content, which deal with issues of monitoring what has been going on, which deal with issues of putting in place a fund that would help local companies. So it is not a matter of say you have Enterprise Center or you have this, but Enterprise Center is part of institutional development within economies to implement local content. And as we have heard from the question that was asked earlier from Latin America, where there are no enterprise centers, there are Chamber of Commerce. So it is not a question of having alternatives, but having institutions that support one another. If you look at the case of Uganda, now there are two institutions that are being put in place. The Petroleum Authority as a board, and the Uganda National Oil Company. So these institutions, which have been put in place recently, will definitely support the Enterprise Center once it is put in place. So the bottom line is that countries that have adopted local content policies must, of necessity, put in place institutions that are going to implement these local content policies. And enterprise centers have been found as one of those in Africa where we see a registration of meaningful and reasonable outcomes.
Elijah, I have a couple more questions. Miriam is asking, we have heard more about the achievements of the enterprise centers, and she says it looks interesting for the African economic conditions. But what are the obstacles that these enterprise centers have faced and that other countries can learn from?
Because definitely these obstacles are in the context of the challenges we have been discussing on the Learning Alliance. You know, like in most African countries, the business environment is not the best. Although there are some positive aspects in terms of the physical regime. Some countries have adopted taxes that have been able to attract local companies to participate in the sector. But because the business environment as a whole is not yet the best, it means the birth of new companies is limited, because if the process of registration of a new company is cumbersome, if the taxes are still very high, if corruption is very high in an economy, then this discourages more companies that are needed to participate in the oil industry. Look at Uganda. Among the 25 areas that have been identified to promote local participation, at the moment, there are 2 areas where Ugandan companies have expertise. That is security and transport. What does this mean? That we need as many more companies in Uganda to participate in those other areas of local content. Now, so if you have an enterprise center that comes in an environment where there is corruption, then definitely that enterprise center will meet an obstacle in terms of encouraging more companies to come and participate. So really the obstacles the enterprise centers have been meeting is the environment, then the capacity of local companies even to come and be assisted. Even to be assisted, you must have some minimum requirements. And getting those minimum requirements may be tempered by the nature of the business environment that exists in an economy or society as a whole.
I'm going to proceed and read one of the last questions we have. The question is, how effective are enterprise centers in resource-rich communities, especially among the low-income people, especially since they are private entities run on market forces? The peasants who compose most African local communities usually don't compete effectively in competitive environments. Any form of affirmative action or deliberate policy to assist them? Any examples in Angola and Nigeria?
Those of you who have been participating in the Learning Alliance, there is one of the publications we have put in the resource library, which is informed this presentation. And one of the recommendations we make in that publication is that African states should establish branches of enterprise centers in various parts of the country. This will ensure the widest possible reach in terms of capacity building of small and medium enterprises and companies with skills and competencies to engage in joint ventures like manufacturing with potential to create more skills and jobs. In other words, we are saying these enterprise centers should be decentralized. If they just remain in capital cities, then as the participant is asking, then the local communities will not benefit. But if they have branches to rural areas, then people would also acquire skills. For example, again, in Uganda, one area we think local communities can benefit is in the area of food supply to the oil industry. Food is a very, very important item for the industry, but if the local companies have not been prepared, have not improved their skills, you will end up seeing international oil companies importing food from abroad because the food that is produced locally may not meet the standards. Because there are standards. One of the things that have been in Uganda by Uganda institutions that are required to put in place standards with the Ministry of Energy. Now they are already customized standards on a number of things. So these local communities, for them to be able to supply food to the industry, they have to meet those standards. And without being trained, being helped to reach those standards, I don't see how those communities would be able to participate in the supply chain. So I agree with the one who is asking the question that the enterprise centers, to be useful to the local communities, they need to really to go down, not just be city-based.
I think that was our last question from our participants. And with that question, I would like to close the session if there are no further comments or questions from any side. In any case, I just wanted to let you know that we will be uploading the materials from today's session in the Learning Alliance. And in case you want to keep further with the discussion, I think we will have the space during our weekly debate. So before closing the session, I'm just gonna give the floor to Elijah to say goodbye to our participants. And yeah, so.
And to encourage you to continue to participate, those who are already members of the Learning Alliance, that we continue interacting with you to discuss these matters and to continue taking interest in the issues of local content, because we believe that the local content agenda is a possible alternative development strategy that can help the emerging economies to move from where they are to another level in terms of social transformation. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
That will also be on everything on my side. Again, we will share the presentation materials with you. If you have any further questions, please let us know. We'll be happy to answer any more questions. And also, thank you very much from our side. Thank you for attending, and thank you for sharing your questions with us. So thank you and goodbye.